wanted to be a clockmaker at the age of 14. And I got a book out of the library and I started to read about that and make parts of clocks in my father's workshop. I then went to Birmingham Polytechnic. There are these wonderful places which no longer exist. They're universities now, but they're very much onto the skills and the crafts and technical stuff. And I went on a wonderful course called Horology, the Science of Measurement of Time. And it was a 3-year course with 5 students and 2 lecturers. And we learnt all about clockmaking and watchmaking. I went from there to London because I was told the streets were paved with gold, but that wasn't the case. And I tried to get a job doing domestic clock repairs, etc. And I couldn't get a job. And somebody offered me one doing church and public clocks. And I thought, well, I'll do this until a proper job comes along. And then I just fell in love with it. And I met my wife there, and she suggested we set up our own company. And so 31 years ago, we left London and set up the Cumbria Clock Company. And we just specialize in church and public clocks. We now employ 22 people. We work all over the country. We even work throughout the world. We've been down to Fiji, which was excellent because, again, that was rugby and horology. So I was very happy with that. And we've just been out to Hong Kong to work on a clock out there. And we have been, for the last 5 years, involved with this very famous clock on my background here, and the Palace of Westminster. So it's been a really enjoyable journey. We're very much into conservation, and through conservation, you also have to kind of look at innovation, how you can keep clocks, antique clocks, kind of clocks of historical importance, keeping time and being there for future generations. So Big Ben, for example, was put in the tower in 1859, and you have to realize that it was cutting edge technology. It was the Apple iPad of its time. And, you know, it still does exactly what it's made to do. Hopefully, when we finish up in the tower, it will be keeping time within 1 second of the correct time. The first blow of every hour has to be within a second. That's what the original architect Barry said it had to be, and the scientist Airy, and that's what we got to continue. So there's not many machines around now that were built by these famous engineers 162 years ago doing exactly the same job. And it's completely, you know, just still as it was originally made. And really, that's in a nutshell. We work from clocks from 1386, which is the oldest clock in England, and that's ticking away in Salisbury Cathedral, all the way up to manufacturing clocks which are connected to GPS, and then everything else in between.
So it's quite varied work that you do for day to day. There's a lot of sort of historical and even the more modern side of things that you like to look at.
Yeah, it's really interesting from that point of view of working with these important early mechanisms, and then combining that, we make a lot of automatic winding units. People no longer want to go up in these dusty, dirty towers, and the public clocks, these wonderful machines, are protected, so they can't be replaced, and so we have to come up with ways of making sure that, you know, they keep time. We have this little auto regulator which keeps a clock to time, and that's connected to GPS. And we fit night silencing because people don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night anymore. And we have to do all these things to make sure these wonderful machines stay as they were. And they are green machines. You think about, I was talking to some of the conservators here at York this morning, and they have clocks which are still hand wound, still weight driven. All the carbon which was used in manufacturing those clocks 150 years ago is being absorbed by the tree. They are carbon neutral machines, so it's important that we keep them going that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it seems extremely interesting what you do, and I know that obviously there'll be quite a lot of fiddly work in there. Are there any sort of tools that you work with that some of the people watching might recognise, or that they need to know to go into your line of work?
I think if you want to be a horologist, there are still courses out there, which is reassuring. There's Birmingham University running the same course that I did many years ago, and there are other conservation courses. There's even though we're in the kind of agricultural end of horology with the big massive clocks, there are the wristwatches, and wristwatches are very in at the moment, and they are very clever pieces of mechanical engineering. Some of them are still quartz, but a lot of the clock watches made in Switzerland are these beautiful, high precision mechanical devices worth a huge amount of money. And they are out there looking for skilled young people to help design and service these wonderful micro machines almost, really.
So are there any other sort of companies that you've collaborated with or that you work with that would have note to some of the people that might be watching? Maybe somebody's recognized anybody that you've done any work with, obviously besides the background, which gives
we're very lucky. We work, we don't really work with other companies, engineering firms per se, because our workshops are very well equipped for all the type of work that we do. We do everything in-house. We have some really nice clients like the Palace of Westminster, like York Railway Museum. We do historic royal palaces. So we do the astronomical dial at Hampton Court Palace, which Henry VIII had made in 1540. So to be able to stand next to this wonderful clock that Henry VIII would look up to before he went hunting across the fields is quite an awe-inspiring thing. We do the Royal Liver building, which are the biggest dials in the country. They're bigger than Big Ben. We're fortunate to do some of the nicest cathedrals like Salisbury and Canterbury, and all of these places have these little these jewels within them, and these beating hearts, these wonderful clock movements, really.
Just a quick reminder before asking any more questions, if you guys have any questions who are watching, feel more than welcome to start putting them in the chat, and we can start firing them over to Keith a little bit earlier than we usually would do. So yeah, if you think of anything, just put it straight in there. But for me, I'd really like to know, I know that obviously Big Ben has an amazing historical importance, and like you said, working with the one that Henry VIII had commissioned was, again, a huge historical importance. But is there a clock that you think of or something you've worked with in the past where it just, for some reason, really resonates with you and you find really interesting?
Well, the one recently, which, I mean, it's a bit macabre, I must admit. So we've just done the clock at Lancaster Priory, and next to Lancaster Priory is Lancaster Prison. And it was one of the last places that people were hung. And they used to do it at 12 o'clock. And they would hear, the last thing the condemned person would hear was the clock striking, which, when you're working on the clock, which produced the sound of the last thing many people heard, is quite a strange feeling. And yeah, it kind of brings all that back to home, what it's all about. There are some lovely little clocks that we look after in village churches all over the place. I personally like the mechanisms which play tunes on the bells up in the tower. So they're a big music box, and there's a couple of those in small villages like Buckland in Gloucestershire, and other towns throughout the country. Kendal Town Hall has got one, and Manchester Town Hall, where we're just doing a big job, they have 23 bells which play tunes. And if you think about it, it makes it one of the heaviest musical instruments in the country. and they're planning at the end of the project perhaps have a concert of tunes played by modern musicians on all the bells out in Albert Square, which will kind of bring this set of bells which were cast in 1878 to life in the modern world, playing modern tunes, which you'll be able to send your requests in for whatever you want.
They should have their own radio station, I think, for that. Just Manchester's bell music. That'd be something interesting, I think, to listen to in the car on the way to work.
Yeah.
We've got a very specific question. When the clocks go forward on huge clocks like Big Ben, who would actually change that? Is there a mechanism in there to do it, or would that be something that your company would take on it?
It's something we do, not as much as we used to. When I first started, we used to start clock altering on the Thursday before and we'd carry on until the Tuesday, because a lot of the clocks were still mechanically wound and hand operated. So our job was to go and set the clocks to the correct time, which we still do. Nowadays, we have little devices which we fit to the clocks, and these are something we developed with a clever little bit of software and a little actuator, which stops the pendulum and restarts it either 1 hour or 11 hours later. So that's one way of, modern engineering techniques have come into our kind of conservation-minded world, and has reduced the amount of time you have to go up and down the towers. A lot of the electrical clocks are operated by stepper motors now, so they just do it very quickly overnight, just being impulsed through by a computerized system.
So there's been some level of modernization of, as you put, some of these extremely old mechanical pieces of equipment. There's been some sort of modernization. Is that modernization something that your company would partake in as well?
We kind of modernize them with these auto regulators, but the nice thing about the stuff that we do, everything can be removed. We haven't altered the original clock in any shape or form, and that's with anything that we make. We make sure that it's fully reversible, that we don't even drill or cut any of the original clock, that they're clamped into position and just can be removed, and the clock can go back to the way it was when it was built in the 1800s or 1700s. So that's a very important thing, and we're the first company which got these auto regulators out on the market. So we've been making them for quite a few years now. And you talk about where we use modern technology. We've just developed a system where we can put very discrete monitoring around the mechanism. And should the clock start gaining or losing or having problems, then that's sent back to us in our office up in Cumbria, and we can see what's happening before sometimes the customer knows they've got a problem. And, it makes it that we're not doing as many journeys to and from a building because we can monitor it remotely. And that is quite interesting, really, because all these clocks have different lengths, pendulums, and you can start to analyze all the information of how pendulums are affected by temperature, by barometric pressure, etc., etc. So hopefully, once we get a little bit further down the line with this monitoring system, we hope to offer it to schools and universities so that they can use it as an educational program. And if you go on the websites of Trinity College in Cambridge, the chap there who's in charge of vibrations or engineering's, I forgot his name, Hugh Hunt, I think it is. A very famous chap. He has a turret clock in his office, and he monitors that, and he puts that out on the net. You can go and look at it now, and it will tell you what the clock is doing. And he's put special devices on it to accommodate for barometric pressure, for temperature. And he is starting to pick up some really interesting effects on the pendulum by different things and analysing that. And that's being used by the students at Cambridge Trinity University. So it goes to show that a turret clock can be a useful educational tool.
Yeah. We've got a question that's specifically about your sort of school life. I'm feeling like I already know the answer, but if you had a favourite subject when you were at school, I'm feeling like you're going to be a bit of a history buff. I feel like that's the...
I wasn't. It was. I'm old enough now that we used to have a thing called metalwork, and yeah. I used to. Metalwork and technical drawing were my. I think now it's resistive materials or something like that. Yeah. But we were very fortunate that you would have a full set of lathes and milling machines and things which the health and safety in schools would run screaming down the road with nowadays. But we were taught to use those at the age of 13, and that was very much history. Yeah, I was always interested in history, but making things was always my passion.
So we've got another question about the picture behind you there. When will Big Ben be restored? They'd like to know.
Well, when I leave York here, I'm going back up there. It will hopefully all be up and running by spring. You will see, hot off the press, before it hits the press actually, that the scaffolding's coming down and 3 dials will be showing the correct time for New Year's Eve and Christmas, painted in their new blue and gold. And you'll see on this photograph behind me, the old black dial and the new blue dial. So it's out with the old and in with the new. And this was down to paint analysis. I think you might have read about it, that they found originally the dials were painted blue. Black as a color, as black, wasn't being produced till the 1920s. They were using colors like blue and red and green. And this is a rare photograph because of the two differences. They dropped the part of the contract was that one dial had to show the correct time all the time while the building work was being undertaken. And so this is that rare day when they had to, they uncovered the new one and then started to cover up the old one. And part of my contract was we had to make 2 sets of replica hands, which are both on here at the moment, 2 massive electric drive units to drive the dials, because we'd removed the whole clock. So this photograph is not only showing the old dial and the new dial, but is the only one with 2 sets of Cumbria Clock Company hands on. And we used to find that funny because they were perhaps the most photographed item in London for 2 years, and nobody knew that they were replicas.
Right. Wow. Yes. Been a little bit sneaky around everybody there without them realising hands out on them. It's very interesting, though. I think, especially like you say, we're looking at it and finding out that they've sort of analysed the colouring correctly, and they've realised that it's a back to blue kind of thing. I think that's quite an interesting look, and again, that sort of fits in with the history of it. Like you were saying, it's extremely interesting. We have a very long-winded answered question for you here. Mongolia class would like to know, how do clocks work?
Right. Right. They are usually weight up. You need a power source. So that could be a weight or a spring. And you then need an oscillator to regulate how quickly that weight drops or that spring unwinds. And that oscillator can be 2 things, really. One, like if you looked in the back of the watch, you see something going round and round and round and round, kind of flicking backwards and forwards. And that's called a balance wheel, and it's got a hairspring in. And so, and then if you look at a clock, you have a pendulum which swings from side to side. And what makes a clock interesting is that the weight or spring that drives it is regulating or impulsing a pendulum or an oscillator, and therefore it determines that oscillator determines how quickly that weight goes down. And the whole thing was to make that oscillator as accurate as possible, so that one tick was always a segment of time, like 1 second. And to do that was a very, very complicated procedure, and a lot of scientists worked at it. And it was really in the kind of golden age you start to see really important scientists like Christian Huygens over in Holland developing the little spring at the top of a pendulum. Robert Hooke, the famous English scientist, he made what was called a recoil escapement using a pendulum. And that was one of the first clocks to keep accurate time. And that was capable of keeping a clock to, say, 2 or 3 minutes a week. Whereas the old, big, slow swing oscillator, you'll be lucky to get 15 minutes a day. And slowly, as the importance of accurate timekeeping was needed in society, so people were exploring the stars, and you needed something accurate to time the motion of the planets. So clocks became a very important part of our society because of the need of that. And if you look at anything you do in your science lab, you are timing it. And you are timing it using an oscillator still. But nowadays, that is a crystal. And that has a voltage going through it, and it vibrates at some stupid rates. But it is still something, oscillating, really. And with public clocks like Big Ben, like the one behind us, they had great difficulties keeping clocks to time with 23.5 feet diameter dials. So that in meters is, something like 6.5 meters, if I'm correct, perhaps 7 meters, 8 meters, 8 meters. You got exposed hands 200 feet up in the center of London, and those hands are being buffeted and knocked about by the wind. And people had to, a chap called Lord Grimthorpe, so Edmund Denison, came up with an escapement called Lord Grimthorpe's double three-legged gravity escapement. And that revolutionized public timekeeping because that separated the impulse to the pendulum from the driving force of the clock, and therefore made them very accurate. So basically, that's a long question with a long-winded answer, or a short question with a long-winded answer.
It is all very interesting. I feel like it's something, like you say, that's been honed over the course of us sort of, I suppose, having an understanding of time. It's only something that can improve, and like we spoke about before, it's modernizing slowly, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at
Esther from Cambodia. Oh, sorry.
Carry on.
So I was only going to ask you another question. If you've got a follow on, you're more than welcome to let us know. Well, Esther from Cambodia class would like to know what inspires you as an engineer.
With me, I'm inspired by the people who have been before me. I'm very fortunate position to see the work of other engineers who started working. So like the Salisbury Cathedral clock, built in 1386, is a wonderful piece of blacksmithing. And it's so accurate that you can take it apart like an IKEA flat pack and then put it together. There's no nuts, bolts, or screws with these early clocks. It's all wedges. And you put it together and you knock these wedges in, and that clock goes square and true immediately. And that's somebody from nearly 700 to 650 years ago doing that type of standard of workmanship. And then you go through the years seeing all these engineers who were capable of with limited machinery, producing accurate mechanisms. And that inspires me. And then when you start to get up into the Victorian era, so let's look at the clock behind us, made by a chap called Dent. But we think most of it was manufactured in a very famous engineer called Maudsley, who had one of the best machine shops in London at the time. And so Maudsley made a lot of the components and Dent put them together. And that's not a lot different to what goes on in a lot of engineering firms now, where people have engineers making parts for them and they assemble them. And, you know, we are, or I've always said that I feel sometimes I'm standing on the shoulders of horological giants to let me see further, because, you know, you see these names in history, these famous engineers who you read about, people like Bramah, again, he made clocks. Robert Stevenson, the railway engineer, here today, I've seen clocks that were made for him. You get to understand what the importance of time was and the engineers involved before me.
So we'd like to know what the biggest clock that you've ever worked on. I remember you said that the Liver had a larger face than Big Ben did.
Yeah.
A larger clock that you've worked on while you've done it.
I think the Royal Liver building is, obviously, there is one bigger clock that I haven't worked on, and that's on the Shelmex building on the River Thames. But that that is 26 feet in diameter, or you have to convert that to nearly 9 meters in diameter. But we don't call it a dial because they're just markers stuck on the wall. So that's one I'd like to get to grips with one day. But the Royal Liver building, it's a long way up above the Mersey, and it's their big hands, and we took them off for the first time in 110 years, and that was a very testing job. So yes,
I think that sort of fits into what Morocco class would like to know. They have double-barreled the question, and they said, how many years have you been a clockmaker, and do you get to fix and make expensive watches and clocks?
I've been a clockmaker now for 41 years. So there you go. So it's been a long time. I don't make watches. Watches are a marvelous thing. There's only 2 companies in Britain who make a fully British watch. One of them is Roger Smith on the Isle of Man. He makes wonderful watches and pocket watches. Their starting price is around £125,000. So start saving your pocket money now for your dad's Christmas present. And you could then, if you don't want a Roger Smith, you could go to a wonderful company in London called Frodshams, a very old company, and they're making an equally expensive, lovely watch, which is also very good for your mum, and they're again around 120,000. So if you can save up £250,000 for your mum and dad's birthday and Christmas presents, I think that'll be a good start.
Somebody said, how big are the clock faces on Big Ben's clock?
They're 23.5 feet in diameter. So that is nearly 7 meters. They've got 324 panes of glass per dial.
Wow.
So that's a lot of pieces of glass. They did think it was 312 until they did this recent restoration project, and they found 12 more around the center. So there's 324 panes of glass in the dials. They're made from cast iron. The hands are bronze and copper, and they are in remarkable condition for something which is 200 feet up in the air.
It sounds like a job where you can't afford to have a colleague who is at all clumsy when you're dealing with so many panes of glass in one. Oh, I'd
we're all very nervous when we go up there. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. I think I'd be wrapped in bubble wrap to get that myself. That'd be it. How long does it take you usually to make a clock?
We've only made 2 turret clocks from scratch because they're expensive. They are expensive to make.
Yeah.
And they both take about 3 months to build, because back in the day when the Victorian clockmakers were making them, they had loads of castings and they had everything jigged out to do it. It takes us a lot longer. One of the clocks was for an insurance claim in a building in Manchester, so we made a replica. But we made another one for a mining museum in Australia, and it was a steam clock. So we made this wonderful mechanical clock movement, which had an inclined plane railway, where you have one truck going up a slope and one going down. Yeah. Well, they were the 2 weights which powered the clock, and they were wound up by a little steam engine at the bottom, and then there was it was connected to the steam main, and that played Westminster Quarters on whistles. So that was quite a project.
That sort of, I suppose, leads on to something I'd like to know. What's the most fun project you've done? I know I already asked which you found with you, but there's got to be something stands out, especially with the whistles, no pun intended, that's you find really fun that you just...
Well, I mean, some of us of a certain age will remember the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang had a car, and it's still shown at Christmas, so you might actually be able to see it again. And that car was built by a chap called Ronald Emmett. And Ronald Emmett went on to make some feature clocks, and one of them is in Basildon, and one of them is in Nottingham, and one of them's just been brought by the Science Museum. And they are just fun clocks, which on the quarter of an hour, unicycles move around and umbrellas and whistles go off. And they're just a visual delight, lovely sounds, and they stop everybody in the shopping centres to look at the clocks. And you just don't see that type of, I suppose you could call it kinetic art. And I think I love seeing that. It's absolutely brilliant. Both of them make me smile when I see them. And there's another good one, not made by Emmett, but there's one in Cheltenham, which is a big rotating fish which blows bubbles on the hour. And I think that's what we need, more bubble blowing fish in our lives, as far as I'm concerned.
I couldn't agree more. No, definitely not. I think that sort of fits into what Sydney would like to ask you as well. She's said, do you have to be imaginative to be an engineer? And I think that, especially with the fish blowing bubbles, yes.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good question, Sydney. I mean, I think if you have the skill and ability to be an engineer with a good imagination, then you're going to be successful. That's what I would say. And, you just have an idea and build it. I think that's what they used to do. And I think, why not do it now? And make things which make people smile, and make things which kind of are wondrous to the eye, I think. And let's be honest, nowadays we've got to have things which not going to, we're now making automatic winding units which are solar powered. We really want, as a company, to kind of keep these naturally green machines as green as possible, so they're going to be there in another 300 years, not producing any carbon footprint whatsoever. So just keep on dreaming, I suppose.
Yeah. So I was wondering how, when you're repairing a clock that's had a lot of damage done to it, or you say a bad repair, how do you deal with that and keep all of the parts original?
It's a case of judgment. You've got to ask the question. You can't you can't approach clock making or horology with a one-size-fits-all philosophy. Every project has to be judged on its own merits, and so that's really important. And when we're working on these, any clock really, we you know, in the workshop, we'll sit around and say, right, look, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. When it comes to replacement parts, that's always an interesting one. Now, when I started, it was a case, if a wheel was worn, we had to recut it. If a pinion was worn, we had to make a new pinion. Nowadays, we don't need to be doing that because there are modern techniques with laser welding, brazing, TIG welding, TIG. You can build worn areas up and reprofile them, which means that you keep the originality of the clock as much as you can. When it comes to bad repairs, it's always one, or repair work. Not all of them are bad.
Yeah.
It's about thinking about where does that repair come in the history of the clock. We don't necessarily have the right to say that's not how it was when the clock was built. The clock has a story, and that story has to be told. And so if the clock was built in 1720 and then modified by somebody else in 1850, and then another repair in 1936, all of them build a picture. And if they're all of a good standard, they all add something to the clock, there's no reason why we should take it back to the way it was in 1720. So it's always about thinking about what's best for the clock and what's best for the future. You know, I could be talking to the next turret clock makers who are going to find lots of better ways of conservation techniques than I can dream of. And, you know, I think that's the wonderful thing about it. You've got to keep that story. So when they come across a bit of repair work by Keith Scobie-Youngs of the Cumbria Clock Company, they will remember a kind of a white-bearded old man who kind of said, told them about it.
So I know that you said you've got 22 employees at the moment at the Cumbria Clock Company.
Yeah.
And is it something that maybe some of the older kids or anybody else who is interested in that, can they come to you for an apprenticeship, and could they come to you for work? Or
yeah, we run apprenticeships. Obviously, you know, we don't have a huge number of apprentices, but we do run an apprenticeship. We take interns. We've had interns from Icon. We have them from Birmingham. We have them from Westdean. If anybody's interested in horology, if somebody knocks on my door and says, I'm interested in clockmaking, there's always a cup of tea in the workshops for them. And then that's the important thing. And, you know, it's something you need to be passionate about. If you have an interest for old mechanisms or that type of thing, then it is a form of engineering. Conservation engineering is a different world to mechanical, digital, electrical engineering, but it is without doubt a form of engineering, which is very important to the heritage of this country. So if you have an engineering bent and you like history, then perhaps conservation is the way for you to go. I don't know, but you have to be passionate.
Yeah, I think that is true with any form of engineering, isn't it, that you'd like to take on? It's got to be something that you're driven to do, that you've, like you said, you've been working on clocks even when you were 14. It's got to be something that it's just come naturally to you, that you're so interested in, that you can't wait to learn, like you say, another conservation method or another way of working. And
yeah. So my eldest son has just joined the company, and he went and did a master's in mechanical engineering at Newcastle, and he left there and he went and worked for a big Dutch engineering firm, Royal IHC, doing these amazing pipe laying machines across, you know, seabeds. And it was absolutely wonderful. And William learnt a huge amount from that and has come into clockmaking with, you know, a different way of looking at horology. I mean, he's been brought up in horology, so he knows how the whole thing works. So it's not if he's coming completely fresh, but he, it's amazing how much we can learn from there, bringing into now. So that's been an interesting one, and how engineering can bring its way into horology.
Katie's got a question for you about Big Ben. She has said, how many gears are there in Big Ben?
Oh, so that's a very good question. Too many. As long as I don't have any spares, Katie, we're all right. That's all I can say. There's not as many as you think. As the clock mechanism itself, in the movement itself, there are. I'm trying to count them all up now. I would say about 30. Behind each dial, there is another 16. But there's all the auxiliary. There's rollers, anti-friction rollers. There's shafts. There's levers. There's pulleys. I mean, Big Ben, the bell, weighs 13.5 tons. It's hit by a hammer, which weighs half a ton. And we have to lift that hammer up and drop it precisely. And that Big Ben hammer, even though it is huge, is made up of 12 parts. And the hard thing with working on a clock like Big Ben is the logistics of getting everything up a clock tower. Is 220 feet to the belfry above the dials. And it's, okay, we got the lifts and everything like that, but they're still heavy, and it still is a Victorian building, and it still is, quite a small footprint, as a building site. And I've been massively impressed by the main contractors there. We've working with some big people like Sir Robert McAlpine, Lend-Lease, PhD Scaffolding, Cliveden Conservation, and DBR, stonemasons. All of them are there working in this confined space, and we all get on. There's been no fallout. I think I've got a reputation of being very grumpy about anybody producing any dust, because even though the mechanism itself weighs 11.5 tons, and it's very big. I mean, one component, the quarter chime barrel, weighs 760 kilos. It's the heaviest item in horology, and I keep on saying I want a dust-free environment, and I think a lot of them think, but Keith, it's this big piece of machinery. And I say, well, no, it's still a precision instrument. You wouldn't take the back of your Rolex watch, put it on the kitchen table and start decorating, would you now? So it's exactly the same as that. So it's been a great project and working with some great people, but I think I am the grumpy dust man.
Ida would like to know, what is your favorite historical clock and why?
Wow, that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I think it has to be Big Ben, because how many clocks are on sauce bottles? That's what I want to know. And also, the Big Ben is so famous. The sound of Big Ben, the way it was played across the world, it means so much to people as a clock tower, for good things and bad things. It is iconic. And I refer to it as the heartbeat of the nation. It has a very unique tick, and we took that tick out of that tower 4 years ago, and we had it transplanted up into Cumbria, so it was ticking away there. Today, hopefully, it will be ticking away again, and we're very keen to get that done for Christmas. And it is the world's most famous, and so I think because of that point of view, from a historical point of view, it has to be my favourite. We just done one in Edinburgh on the Whiskey Centre, which has rotating Scotsmen playing bagpipes. I quite like that one, but that's a different one altogether.
Is it difficult doing your job day to day, being an engineer? Is it hard work, do you find, or? it's sort of patience pays off and you get through it kind of thing.
We all have bad days, don't we, in whatever job we do. So, you know, it's not always a bed of roses, but I consider myself very fortunate to be able to have made a living and a career in something I'm very passionate about. And I kind of, you know, my father used to say to me, Keith, you know, go and do what you want and just be the best at it. And I think, you know, that's what I tried to do. And I think, you know, there's always somebody better than you, and you've always got to work harder. But I think in engineering, I think, you know, you can follow your dreams in something like that, and it does come down to a lot of hard work, and and you do enjoy it. But there are some days when you think, I wish I had a normal job. I can stack shelves. I can do that quite nicely. But there you go.
Very interesting question here. How much would you have said that Big Ben is worth? What would you value the entire?
Well, just the whole tower or just the mechanism? Can I just do the mechanism bit? Because
we'll go mechanism.
Yeah. We'll go mechanism. I mean, that was a really good, interesting one, because, you know, we had to insure it. Obviously, it had to be insured. We didn't have to insure it, but I had to give a price. £5 million as a rebuild price. That's what we came up with. If you had to make another one, what would it cost? The dials would be a different kettle of fish as well. I could imagine you throwing another few £1 million at making those, and the bells. Well, a 13.5-ton bell doesn't come cheap, and then you've got the other 4 bells surrounding it. So I think let's have a guess for the dials, hands, movement, and bells. Shall we settle for 20 million?
Oh yeah. Again, I'm glad that you're working on that and not me. What I said before is true. I'd be wrapped in bubble wrap while I was anywhere near that. We'll just take a few more, and then I'll sort of do a few closing statements, so we're not keeping you for too long. What is your favourite part of the clock?
Of any clock? Of
any clock. As like you mentioned, the pendulum before.
I think for me is the escapement, the heartbeat, the ticking part. I think you start to see those and understand the years of development, and you can follow a path of thought that horological engineers have trodden all the way from, you know, the earliest clock we know of being built was by a chap, I can't remember his name. Anyway, about 1250. And so there's been, horology has gone from 1250 all the way along up to the atomic clocks in the satellites, which give us GPS. I mean, so they all come down to, as I said, that kind of oscillator, that vibration. So I think it has to be that part, the heartbeat of the clock, the escapement. That's what I'll say.
Joseph has asked, have you ever faced any major challenges during a project?
Yes, yeah, a lot of the major challenges we've had are just getting big things out of small places. So that's always a challenge. And also, when on the odd occasion when we're rebuilding an unusual clock, where people have altered it considerably through ignorance, and then you're trying to, on the rare occasion, bring it back to working as it was originally designed, they can be very challenging and very time-consuming, and trying to understand what that person was thinking about. So, yeah, I think the getting 11.5 tons of turret clock out of a tower for Big Ben was a challenge. Getting the hands off the Royal Liver building, which are 240 feet up in the air, without a scaffold, that was challenging. And some of the rebuilds you do in the workshop through missing parts or whatever can be a challenge. But at the end of the day, that's what you do the job for, those challenges, that's what you want in life.
Kai has asked, what made you want to become an engineer when you were younger?
I think my father was that metalwork teacher at the local school. So I was always brought up with the fact that if you could make something with your hands, you'd always have a job. So that was, what my father said to me. I think engineering is not necessarily making things with your hands now, it's making things with your brain. And I think you still get that kind of feeling of satisfaction of designing and developing something, especially with the modeling programs now. And I think that would, nowadays, that would be what would make me want to be an engineer now.
How many people are there working to restore Big Ben?
There's, two of them are up the tower now, but I'll be there soon. The whole company has been involved in that, and also the Palace Clock team have been with us as well, which has been great. They're the people who look after it on a day-to-day basis. They've been working with us through the whole project. So with Ian and Hugh from the Palace Clock team, and now Alex, part of the Palace Clock team, there's usually up the tower between 5 and 6 of us.
How many repairs do you think you might have done over the course of your life? I know you said you're plus 40 years or so, but how many repairs do you think you've done?
Properly? I don't know. It's a tough one, that thousands. So, yes.
I was going to say that fits into what Lily May was going to... What's the easiest clock that you've ever fixed?
A quartz battery.
Quartz battery.
I put the new battery in.
Oh, there we go. Right. Well, I don't want to keep you, so we'll just do a little bit of a closing, and then I'll let you get off and get back to your very interesting job and shoot down to go and see Big Ben.
Thank you very much.
So, well, thank you. It's been absolutely lovely having you. I hope everybody else has found this as educating and informative and interesting as I have. Thank you for attending this and speaking with us today and taking your time to come and tell us all about this. I'm sure everybody else is as open as us. I can see a few waving hands back there. Everybody is interested. You can always look back over this if you've missed some of it up on YouTube, so you can catch up with it again. You go to Primary Engineer YouTube channel, have a look at it there. If you've not had a chance to look at all your resources, if you are taking part in the project, just go to our leadersaward.com website as well. These take place every Wednesday at 1:30. If you want to have another look at some other interesting people that we have a chance to speak with, you're more than welcome to come and join us again next week. Other than that, thank you again, Keith, and I hope everybody else has a lovely day.
Thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. And if people want any information about clocks, please just drop an email and we will respond if we can. No problem at all.
Amazing. Well, thank you and goodbye to everybody.
Okay, cheers now.
See you later.
Bye.